everyone, it's Paul with Cruise Planners Getaway Gang. My partner in crime over there in Phoenix is Ed Gates. How are you, sir?
Hey, everybody, I'm great. Hey, Paul, how's the weather out there? Don't ask me about
it's hot both here and there, but I mean, it's 100 degrees here. I hesitate to ask how hot it is there. It's hotter than that, I'm sure. But.
Well, we're on a warming trend, and we're actually in an extreme heat advisory already through Monday, and they're actually predicting very, very close to 120. I think the high is 117, but anytime you get up that high, it doesn't. It all feels the same. It's just hot.
Even seem real. So stay inside or just stay in your pool. I don't know. Maybe even too hot to swim. But well, I understand. I told you about this. We both have stickers on today.
I voted.
Kept my bandage on, which I've got it. Well, there I'm glittering in and out. But I went to give blood. I did Power Red, which was new for me, where they actually take out just the red blood cells and then pump the rest of the stuff back in you. So it took a while, but I feel fine, and it was cool. It's been over 10 years since I gave blood, and then you had your sticker too.
I was going to say you're looking a little pale there, Paul.
Well, that's just me because I'm white. I'm way too white.
Right. Yeah. Well, we got our primary in about a week and a half here in Arizona, but I got my mail-in. There it is, my mail-in sticker. So I did my ballot. I put my sticker on. I'm feeling pretty patriotic right now.
All right. Well, we both did our part for the good of the community and country today. So cheers to us.
That's right.
It is the first. Well, we were on holiday last week. I hope everyone had a good 4th. So it's our first show of July of the month. So we're going to talk about a couple news stories today.
It's July already?
I know. Tell me about it. I unfortunately had the discussion with Steph about how way back when all this nonsense started, I'm like, oh, man, just imagine we're going to have a great big July 4th party. It's going to be behind us. Everyone's going to be over. It's going to be great. And then I recalled that conversation, and I was like, oh, God. So, yeah, we're still in the thick of it, and it is somehow July. But there is a lot of random little bits of travel news out there, but we wanted to talk about 2 big stories today. The first one is about Mexico, because there's been a lot of talk. They've started to open back up, and people want to know, all the popular tourism hotspots. Can you get in? Can you go to Mexico? So, Ed, tell us some about that.
Well, Mexico's a little tricky right now. As you know, there are border crossing restrictions with both Canada and Mexico right now. And Mexico just extended their border crossing restriction to July 21st. However, you can still fly into Mexico. So there's no restrictions on flights to Mexico. No quarantine or testing is required for entry, but arrivals are subject to screening, such as temperature checks as they enter the country, and visitors are expected to wear masks and social distance. Many well-known tourist destinations are expected will begin to at least partially reopen early this month. In fact, some of them have already reopened. Each Mexican state is responsible for orchestrating and executing its own tourism reopening strategy. So here's a few of the destinations that we got on the way, leading the way. Mexican Caribbean, of course, Cancun, Puerto Morelos, Playa del Carmen, Tulum, and the Riviera Maya all started re-welcoming visitors on June 8th. So it's open and running down there. It is championing new health and safety certification for all its travel sector suppliers. Cancun is now operating at 30% capacity, they're using thermographic cameras at the airport for arriving passengers, and they've already welcomed about 70,000 visitors.
Crazy,
over the
70,000 already.
Yeah, since reopening. Riviera Nayarit and Puerto Vallarta began reopening to visitors on June 15th. The hotels are currently permitted to operate at 25 to 30% capacity and must adhere to strict health and safety protocols. Some PV hotels have not reopened yet. Spas remain closed. But swimming pools, beach clubs, gyms, and restaurants have been allowed to reopen. I don't know if all the resorts have them open or available just yet. So you check if you're planning on going down there. Check with your resort. Restaurants are operating at about 50% capacity, but the bars remain closed. Puerto Vallarta's iconic Malecon oceanfront promenade hasn't yet fully reopened to the public yet. So shopping is going to be limited down there too. But if you just want to go down and have some beach and sand and get away, it might not be a bad idea. Yeah. Los Cabos opened to travelers and traveling tourism activities back on June 15th. Social distancing is required at one person per 13 feet. So stay far away from each other. It's not a good area for couples right now. Recreation and social activities are allowed at 30% capacity. The airport's international terminal will reopen next week on July 15th. Mexico City, you want to go down to the capital, began reopening to tourism on June 29th. Hotels, restaurants, and shopping centers are all being allowed to operate at 30% capacity, and open-air markets and street vendors have been allowed to resume activities as well. Amusement parks, casinos, sporting venues, theaters, nightclubs, spas, or fitness centers are not reopening yet. So
it sounds like overall it's a little similar to the US in terms of their capacities and such, but I know they are one part of the world, unlike Europe, which is basically still barring Americans and North Americans. They are really focusing on people from the US and from Canada to restart their tourism sector, which is obviously critical to the country.
Right. And Mexico is very accessible for a lot of people. And if you right now, since they don't have a lot of the activities available, but they are mostly focusing on people who are going for leisure getaways.
Go to an all-inclusive, and you won't even have to leave. Everything will be sort of, handled, and it doesn't, matter as much anyway. I think.
Right.
We've had a lot of people reach out to us already, looking later this year and into early next year that we're doing bookings of all-inclusives in Mexico. And in terms of something that may be realistic for 2020, I think it's a good idea. So we should keep our eye on that.
Yeah. So, and one area is I haven't heard much about yet of the Bajas, so I have to check into that one and see what's going on. I had a couple people ask me about Baja. Do you know anything, Paul?
No, it wasn't on the list of things that I had been researching, but it varies state by state. So it may not, there may not be a lot open because it's not as a major a tourism center in terms of
right,
like Riviera Maya or Puerto Vallarta or Cabo. So.
Right. Well, speaking of Caribbean, Paul, as you brought it up, we haven't had a cruise update from you in a while. Why don't you give us what's going on in the cruise lines?
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been reaching out to us. We've had a lot of discussion going on in our own private circles and in our VIP group because our very own Paul and Ed cruise with Paul and Ed that was scheduled for November was actually canceled. Boo. And actually, there's a longer story behind that. It wasn't
even canceled because of COVID.
It wasn't directly related to COVID. It was around.
It wasn't directly related, but it wasn't canceled directly because of it.
The short answer to why it was canceled was simply that Carnival decided to take our ship, the Breeze, which was in Fort Lauderdale, and move it to another port to take passengers from the Radiance, which is their newly completely refurbished ship, which is not going to be done on time. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But so basically they kicked all the passengers off and we were among them. So it looks like that at least some of our group will be going on a different ship out of Miami at the same time, under the same time frame. So listen in the group for that. We'll drop some info if you're wanting to see what cruising is going to look like in the next few months, if it happens at all. We'll still see. But we talked about how CLIA, Cruise Lines International Association, that is our huge trade association, for the worldwide cruise industry. They announced a couple of weeks ago that cruising would be suspended in the U.S. through September 15th. Carnival pushed that out. They wanted to be a little contrarian, I guess. They took that out to September 30th. So in terms of ocean cruising in the U.S., we're looking at the latter half of September at the earliest now. We'll see how that plays out, because really it's going to be in big part what the CDC ends up doing. And it's mum's the word since basically early April, when the CDC came out with their no sail order, and then it was extended until July 24th. There have been some murmurings and some reports, although obviously it's in no one's best interest for there to be rancor and ill will, but apparently the CDC and CLIA and ASTA, which is a travel agent trade association, have not necessarily been communicating very well. CLIA and ASTA, obviously, they want cruising to come back. It's a huge part of tourism in the U.S. But unfortunately, the CDC has not been real good, unfortunately, about working with them on protocol and what that's, what's going to look like for cruising to come back. So there is some frustration there. We hope that that opens up a bit. On a different front, just kind of taking the bull by the horns, on the same front, I should say, but on a different avenue. This week, it was announced that Royal Caribbean and Norwegian partnered up, and they're doing something called the Healthy Sail Panel, which has been tasked with developing recommendations for all cruise lines to advance a public health response to COVID-19, improve safety, and achieve readiness for the safe resumption of cruise operations. So the panel's apparently already been working on this, and it makes sense. We've talked some about what we think that might look like. They've already been working for a month, and they hope to have their, like, a real true first draft of their report out by the end of next month in August. Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who was a former commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, is the co-chair of that Healthy Sail Panel, believes that cruising in a COVID environment, so it might become even safer than traditional land travel, simply because, as he quotes, the exquisite control over the environment on a cruise ship, allowing cruise lines to create a low-risk protective bubble. And I understand that. If they can, really work hard on creating that protective bubble, it may become safer in some ways than just getting on a plane and flying to London or somewhere else, something like that. The panel will be split into groups focused on different aspects of the cruise process, including testing protocols, modifying the ship to improve health, safety and hygiene, and destination and route planning. So that's kind of the biggest thing going on right now in the cruise industry is work on what it's going to look like for it to be to reopen. In a separate endeavor, but in a similar vein, the Carnival Corporation announced a late July virtual summit on COVID-19 health and social distancing protocols in partnership with the World Travel and Tourism Council. So Carnival's doing their own take on it rather than participating with Norwegian and Royal Caribbean. But it's in the best interest of all of them to work together and to work in a similar vein, and I know that they will be. So another couple cruise-related stories. As a part of an effort to lean operating costs and preserve liquidity deep into next year, which I know when they first took out all of these loans and such, when cruising basically had been, forced to freeze, Arnold Donald, who was the CEO of Carnival, came out and said, well, this gives us basically liquidity through the end of 2020 without any revenue coming in. Well, they've now really stepped up their effort to even have liquidity through the end of 2021 without revenue. And they have actually, read today, committed to sell off 13 ships from their various fleets of brands within the next 90 days, which is it's almost a 10% reduction in the overall capacity of all of Carnival's companies like Carnival, Holland America, Princess, Costa, AIDA, all of those. So that's a pretty big chunk of ships. Unfortunately, The bad news is because a lot of them are older ships, and we talked about this yesterday, they don't have balconies. They don't have a lot of airflow in some of the rooms, and uh, they're having a hard time finding buyers in the secondary cruising market to sell the ships off to. Um, capital firms aren't willing to lend the money, and really the bottom has dropped out of that market in terms of, you know, cruise ships being repurposed and reused by smaller companies. Um, Peter Sharp, who's a director of an investment banking firm, which is focused on cruising in the maritime sector, says the majority of these older ships will not be sold to another user, but will be scrapped altogether. And some of them are only like 15 to 20 years old.
I would imagine that a lot of them are headed to the junkyard.
Yeah, and he says even further, because Carnival's selling off those 13 ships. He says that at least 30 older cruise ships will be scrapped by various companies in the next 18 months. So they're basically going to be leaning down, they being all cruise companies, uh, older ships, ships that don't have as much of the newer features, uh, and balcony rooms and such like that, such amenities like that. And they've also delayed, like I said, one of the reasons our cruise got canceled, our group cruise, was that new build deliveries are also being delayed. Carnival alone said only 5 out of the 9 ships that they were originally scheduled to receive this year and next year will be here in the time that they were expecting. So basically, that's almost a 50% cutback, and that's going to continue into 2022 and 2023 as well. All of that bad news, and it's really not bad news. It's just they're leaning down. They're having to find ways to make sure that they're around when we're finally able to cruise again. The good news is stock prices have been rising. On the Carnival did release some financial numbers that looked better than expected. There's some signs that the cruising industry is already bouncing back. The strong demand for bookings in 2021, because people like me, I'm going to go, and I know you and I differ exactly when that's going to be, but I'm going to go as soon as I can, and then I personally feel that I feel comfortable with it, because and there's a lot of people out there who are cruisophiles like me that are going to do that. So the good news is it doesn't look like any of the major players are going bankrupt or anything anytime soon. And in fact, if you're going to book cruise next year, now's a good time, because they are going to be having, cutting back on capacity, especially in the early months in terms of how many rooms are going to be sold. So you're probably not going to wait around and find a last minute deal on a cruise. If you're interested in going, book it now, months ahead.
I'll tell you what, Paul. I'll take a 30% max capacity resort and a wide open beach over a crowded cruise ship any day.
All right. Well, we'll send you to an all-inclusive, and Steph and I will go to a cruise and we'll compare notes. How about that?
That's right. How about that? That sounds good. And if you guys want to book yourselves onto one of Paul's crazy cruises or one of my Mexican resorts, we're here to help you out.
Absolutely. If you want to sail with Paul, it's going to be the cruise with Paul and Paul in November, because Ed will not be coming.
Paul and Steph.
With Paul and Steph, but it doesn't matter. We'll book you onto any cruise or any. I struck up some conversation with someone in the neighborhood the other day who saw my truck and saw that Cruise Planners is on there. We don't just do cruises. We do everything. If you want to take a trip, let us help you craft something closer to home. You want to go to an all-inclusive in the Caribbean or Mexico. You want to go to Europe when it reopens. We're here to help every step of the way. So I know some of you don't want to cruise, and I get that. So that's
why we call ourselves the Getaway Gang.
That's right. Absolutely. So that kind of wraps up the 2 big stories I want to talk about today. And we'll, of course, keep you apprised of updates across the travel industry, but we'll continue to do our big travel news show the first of every month. But for now, we're going to stick with Friday shows. We'll be back next Friday, and Ed and I will be dropping some fresh content of our own as now that we're on the other side of the 4th of July holiday. As always, if you're watching us on YouTube, we appreciate subscription to our channel, thumbs up on the video, please do check out our VIP group on Facebook. Follow the link in the description here, because Ed especially really kicks butt posting a lot of very inspiring and interesting travel content each and every day in that group. And it's a great way to get in touch with us if you have any travel related questions. So unless you have anything to add, Ed, I'm going to sign off. And until we meet again.
I noticed you wore an LA shirt. Doc,
yeah,
are you
I
ready
meant
for
to
baseball?
say that. I'm ready. I'm still a little worried. I hope it doesn't fall through.
It seems like it's going ahead pretty well. I think, well, what's the date? July 21st?
The 23rd and 24th, depending on the team. So I think, do we kick off against you buttholes out in Phoenix?
That's right, man. The D-bags are taking on the dodos.
Well, I'll be watching, or I'll be listening on the radio at least. So
All
thank
right.
God. I could use some baseball.
Yeah, we can use any kind of sports right now.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Thanks so much for watching. And until we see you again, please stay well and take care.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.